I've often wondered about, is motivation driven through emotion, or is there a degree of logic?
I think it's interesting if people are aiming to inspire others. I think
Right.
most people are the most inspirational when they're just doing what they do and people are inspired by them because of
Mhm,
the
mhm,
impact they have or how they do it or how authentic they are. There's this piece of understanding what your own values are, which I think is interesting because a lot of people say, "Oh, no, I know what I value." I'm like, "Cool. Tell me your top five." And they go,
mhm.
"Oh, family." It's
Well,
funny because I believe that the feeling of psychological safety is probably universal, and yet the
mhm.
concept of prioritizing it and making it relevant in the workplace might not be.
Hello, Team ET. Great to be back with you and commencing a new quarter together. Today, we're going to be chatting about what I believe, at least, is a core topic for all of us as executives in the search to be able to strengthen ourselves as well as our social awareness. And that's whether you're leading other people or you're responsible only for yourself. Our discussion today is on motivation in general, at least. And I personally see motivation as a fundamental driver for our behavior, as well as a predictor for our performance. So for any of you that have listened to me over the period, to any of my rants, you'll know that I hold this belief that awareness alone is not the only thing we require. We also need the ability for self-regulation. And therefore, I'm really excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Benah Parker, to our show for the conversation around this motivational topic, as well as to learn how we might be able to leverage motivation to develop high-performing teams. So, Dr. Parker, welcome to the ET Project. Great to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
So before we jump into this very broad topic, I'd have to say, I personally, but I'm sure our audience also would love to understand a little bit more about you, who you are, your
Mhm.
journey. If you don't mind sharing some of the highlights and what's led you to this point in your career.
Absolutely. So I am a social psychologist by training, but I have been studying leadership and leadership development since I was 14 years old. That was when I did my first leadership training. And
Wow.
it's really funny because I was reflecting last week on the fact that over the last, I'm almost 49. So the last 35 years or so, there are a few key things from that first training I did at 14 that have really shaped who I am as a leader and have really kind of shaped where I went in my career. Because it was this exploration of leadership and this idea that we could get better at helping people be better at what they wanted to do and what we wanted or needed them to do as leaders that led me into, it kind of sprung that first, planted that first seed of wanting to go into psychology and understanding human behavior. And so as I went through college and grad school, this idea of leadership and getting better has really kind of driven everything I've done for multiple decades.
Right. Incredible. You talk about 14. So how were you introduced to leadership training at that age?
I was in the marching band. And
Ah,
I was an
okay.
officer in the band, and our band director, there was actually somebody who came, he went to different cities, and it was called band leadership training. And
Wow.
it was like a week-long camp. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. And you've jogged some things in my thinking here, because I guess in sport we also practice leadership. We may not do it
Mhm.
formally as a training, but if you captain a sports team, you're being introduced to leadership. And I now have this recollection. I think I was in probably grade 9, so about 14. Um,
Mhm.
we had this session. I'm not even sure what it was called, but it was to get us to make decisions. And the decision was we could only save one person out of a list of, I think, 7. And we had to collectively as a team come together and decide which person we would save. And
Got it.
and,
So
and
you're
our
working on negotiation strategies and priorities. Absolutely.
yeah, our team failed miserably because we couldn't come to an agreement. So everyone died in our group. we,
Oh, well,
we could,
that'll
yeah,
happen sometimes.
for sure, for sure. So let's transition a little bit here. your focus, as I
Mhm.
understand, you work with a lot of corporations and
Mhm.
individuals through coaching, through consulting. But motivation is one of your key topics that you like to talk about. So I thought maybe we could start with trying to define the word. It's a popular word. It's
Mm,
used a lot. Um, I have a suspicion, however, that it's like many of these words. When we try and put context around it, it becomes not so clear or easy.
sure. Well,
I
I
don't
will
know if you.
say, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say that as, as a psychologist, as somebody who, I've done the research angle, there probably is a research specific definition of motivation, and I do not know it off the top of my head. But when I think of
Mm,
motivation, when I'm working with my clients and their teams, when we're talking about motivation, it's really what is the thing which is usually unconscious that is driving you to engage in certain behaviors or to act in these certain ways. And there's internal motivations, there's external motivations, and I'm sure as we talk we'll dig into that more, but the
yeah.
motivation is really kind of the driving force that leads to whatever the behavioral outcomes are for the situation.
Mm. Yeah, in preparing for this conversation, I was trying to think myself, how would I define motivation? And it could, we could take so many tangents, I guess, right? Enthusiasm was one word that comes to mind. So my level of enthusiasm for doing something, but I think that's still too shallow, right? So, excuse me. Um, you mentioned internal, external, or
Mhm.
the words intrinsic, extrinsic. Um, they came out of that self-determination theory from memory around about the mid 80s, 90s. Um,
Yeah,
what's the difference? Let's jump into from that end of the pool. What's the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic, firstly, and then to the motivations, the difference between an intrinsic motivator and an extrinsic?
sure. So the intrinsic and extrinsic, when I was teaching this, I always say, well, we can think of it as internal and external because people
Yep.
have a better understanding of that. But with intrinsic, it's going to be something that is inside you, something core to you, again, often unconscious, that is guiding you forward. Whereas
Right.
extrinsic, that is when the external forces around you, whether it's the community you're in, your family, the organization, larger society, all of those are going to be external and extrinsic motivators, extrinsic forces. So
Mhm.
everything we consume from social media, from regular media, from the conversations we have, the stories we read, the things we believe, those external things can all be external motivators. The
Right.
intrinsic ones are the ones that we have internalized. They have become some part of our self-identity, our core beliefs and values of who we are. Those are typically going to be the internal drivers and motivators.
Okay. So, do you have any specific examples? So, what might I see as an internal or intrinsic motivator? Now, I guess
It's interesting because some of the things that things can look external and become internal motivators when
Mhm.
you have. I don't want to go too deep into this idea of identity formation because that's
Yeah.
exactly actually what my dissertation was how people
Okay.
manage these different social identities and the flexibility between them and the
Right.
impact that then has on performance and resilience and achievement.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we're not going to read my dissertation, but when we think of external motivators, a lot of times people can say, oh, well, you're doing this because somebody asked you to do it or somebody expects it of you or it was requested of you. Your boss, your mom, somebody
Right.
said, hey, you need to do this thing, so you're going to go do that thing. Okay, great. That's an external motivation form. Great.
Mhm.
It's kind of like the carrot or the stick, right?
Yeah.
um, Internal motivators, people can still take, oh, my parent, my boss, somebody asked me to do this, and it can become an intrinsic motivator if you have this identity of, I am a person who makes my mom happy. Or, if when it becomes part of your identity is being like a people pleaser, you might
Mhm.
have internalized some of those things that started out as external motivations.
Okay.
So looking at what drives somebody, it's kind of hard to say, well, this is an internal motivation as opposed to an external.
Mhm.
The biggest way to be able to tell when it's somebody's internal motivation is how quickly you can, I don't want to say push against it, but if somebody's internally motivated, they're not necessarily looking to, they're not looking to other people to say, I'm going to do this thing, or they're not looking to other people to tell them to do the thing. They're just going to go do the thing because they have their own internal reasons for doing it.
Okay, right. So I've often wondered about, is motivation driven through emotion, or is there a degree of logic? So if we think about where it stems from in the brain, is it coming from the limbic region, or is it somehow connected with the prefrontal cortex? Is there that distinction when we
I
talk
will
about
say I'm not a
motivators?
neuroscientist. My background's in social psychology, not neuroscience, not neuropsych. And my understanding is that it's both. You know,
Okay,
when in our field of psychology, as you're thinking about motivation, there are
right.
emotional aspects to it and logical aspects to it, but I can't tell you which parts of the brain are actually activated.
No, no problem, no problem. Thank you. And I'm definitely not a neuroscientist either, so yeah, we'll leave that one go. I can imagine that, based on what you were just saying before, I see that each of us are going to be somewhat unique,
Mhm.
meaning that we're not all motivated in the same way or by the same things. And um, there's a lot of theories out there. There's a lot of books being written. Um, Daniel Pink's Drive
Mhm.
comes to mind, where
Mhm.
he talks about motivation under these three headings of autonomy, purpose, and mastery. Um, we're sort of not specifically targeting that, though, I guess, with intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, are we?
No, because I think with the intrinsic and extrinsic, it can kind of go in each one of those areas.
Mm, yeah.
Whether you're working
Okay.
towards mastery, the autonomy, like there will be internal and external motivators in each of those.
Right. Okay. All right. So we're building. We get. I've got some clarity now around what motivators are, and maybe how they impact us. I guess that we don't live in a constant state of motivation, right? I know at least I don't. So I'm
No.
wondering, how do I use the knowledge of what a motivator is and where it comes from to then help to self-regulate myself? So, for instance, can I trigger or stimulate an intrinsic motivation?
That's a great question. I think I would say that you probably can. I will say that motivation specifically is not my area of expertise. It's more about how we're applying it in
Okay.
this field of leadership.
Mhm.
Um, but when I think about it, it's more when you are able to. I'm trying to answer your initial question. Like, yes, we can trigger our own intrinsic motivation because I know that we can trigger it in other people. So I'm
Mm.
just going down my path here. Like, so if we can do this for other people, of course we can do this for ourselves. So
Right, right.
yeah,
Okay.
I think it would just simply be bringing to mind, because a lot of times some of our intrinsic motivators are unconscious. If we are
Yes.
able to make those drivers, those things that are internal to us, salient in the moment, then I
Mhm.
believe that would be enough to trigger that intrinsic motivation.
Right. So we can link the mindfulness, the being present,
Hmm.
being conscious in our choice, our decision,
Yeah.
and
So
yeah,
as you think of, Simon Sinek's knowing your why, that will
yes,
help you tap into some of your internal drivers. So the more you bring your why, your purpose to mind, that's going to make those intrinsic motivators more relevant.
right, right. So if we expand this focus
Mhm.
a little bit away from just ourselves, and we start to look at maybe the leader, or we look at working with teams,
Mhm.
do we still look at motivation as one of the environmental factors we're trying to have within teams to drive high performance? Is that one of the key factors?
I think it absolutely needs to be. And there's a couple of reasons. I like the way that you said, so we're moving away from thinking about our own to the
Yeah.
teams. I think as leaders, it's incredibly important for us to be able to lead ourselves, to know what our motivators are, to know what our drivers are, to know kind of doing that self-reflection. I think every leader should always be, working on their personal and professional development to get to that next level.
Yes.
Um, and I mentioned the leadership training I took back when I was 14. One of the key things that I remember them telling us that stayed with me all these years was, if you're working with a good leader, you're going to like and respect that leader because, they're a good leader. they're leading you, they're guiding you, they're giving you the reasons, they're communicating. You like and respect the good leader. But a
Hmm.
great leader is going to make you like and respect yourself.
Right.
And that has always stuck with me. And so when I think of motivation, and I think about when I'm working with whether they're my individual clients, well, we might spend more time on their intrinsic motivation before we get to, how they're working with their teams. But
Mm.
when a company brings me in and we're working with a leadership team, we spend a lot of time on how do you as a leader motivate your team. And the key difference is being able to, if you can motivate them by helping them see what their internal reasons are to meet the company's vision or mission or goals, getting that alignment piece in there,
Mm.
then you are still motivating them, but you are doing it by tapping into what their internal needs are, so that when you're not there, if you're not there to say, hey, I need you to do this, or we have this deadline, they have their own internal reasons for wanting to achieve the goal.
Right. Yeah. I'm a team coach. Excuse me. So when I think about the individual, the challenges of being an executive coach versus
Mm-hmm.
moving into the role of being a team coach, the degree of complexity or the increase in complexity that comes out of that team environment is quite challenging, to say the
Mm-hmm.
least, right? And I can only imagine if, as a leader, to get to that point of understanding the motivation of the individual within that
Mm-hmm.
team context is a big task in itself.
It
But
absolutely
then when
can
you
be.
put it into that team dynamic where you have that interaction and that interplay, it really changes the ballpark. And is there any like guideline for a leader on how would they make that first foray into trying to do that?
Um, I think it's one of those things that, as it comes down to kind of the leadership development and determining what kind of leader they want to be.
Mm.
Because I don't think a leader's ever going to come to their team and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out what drives you so I can motivate you to do what I want you to do. I mean, that's that's not going to be a great leader. That's not going to be the outcome you want.
Yeah.
But as a leader, the more you are able to, develop your emotional intelligence and your, not just your communication skills, but your influence skills, because
Mm.
every conversation we have to some extent is trying to influence to some outcome. I mean, it's not always about getting a sale or getting, reaching a
Yeah.
sales quota or anything like that. But I mean, every conversation we have is some sort of negotiation, whether it's, trying to get your kid to get out the door to school on time,
Mm.
brush their teeth, put on their shoes, you're negotiating. But as a leader, as you develop these skills to be able to communicate and influence,
Right.
part of that skill comes in knowing what your audience needs, building your own emotional intelligence to know, okay, everybody has some core basic psychological needs. Everyone wants to feel connected. Everybody wants to feel significant. Everybody, has a need for self-esteem.
Yeah.
And knowing that your audience, if you're able to meet those needs in your communication, if you're able to understand what their basic psychological needs are in that moment, they're going to be more likely to hear your message, whatever message
Mhm.
you're
Mhm.
delivering or whatever you're trying to convince them of, and understand why it matters to them.
Right.
Because you can tell them all day long. I mean, you mentioned you had a 9-year-old. You could tell your kid all day long, we can't be late for school. But if you're able to put it to, hey, if we get to school on time, you're going to have more time to play with your friends before class. And then they're like, oh, this is the thing that I want to do. I'm not doing this because, dad's yelling at me. I'm doing this because, oh, I get something out of it too.
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't think of those conversations as, hey, I'm trying to motivate this.
I will try that tomorrow morning. Thank you. There's a lot of debate. I'm just curious about your perspective on this
Mhm.
around a leader's role when it comes to this topic of motivation versus should they be more looking to inspire, or do you make that distinction between the two, or do they sit together somehow?
Mm, I think the distinction I would make is, I think it's I think the thing is, I think it's interesting if people are aiming to inspire others. I think
Right.
most people are the most inspirational when they're just doing what they do and people are inspired by them because of
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
impact they have or how they do it or how authentic they are. And yet at
Yeah.
the same time, as I'm coaching people in this space, if you want to inspire others, if you want to lead others, go in and be authentic, show that you are human. I mean, we can go down all the different things that I coach on, but it's, if you're able to show up authentically and, share when you have had failures and make it a safe place for failures. Failures don't have to be hidden away, but we
Yes.
don't want to repeat them. So we want to, bring them out into
Yeah.
the open. Let's break them apart, see what went wrong in the process or somewhere in the pipeline so that we do it better next time.
Mm.
And the more as a leader you're able to show up authentically, I think that's when you become inspiring.
Right.
And when people are inspired by you, they may then be more likely they're motivated to follow you because, I mean, we know that, I'm trying making sure I'm saying this right, that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. So that if you are showing up authentically and people think, hey, this person's really getting the job done. I like who they are as a person. I like how I feel around them.
Yeah.
I want to be around this person. I want to follow them. I want to emulate them. They're authentic. So then I am motivated to be more like them. I'm going to follow them, So I think in that inspiration, motivation place, it can cross over. But I also don't coach people to try to be inspiring. I coach them more
Right.
to let's be authentic and you will inspire.
Yeah. Yeah. So develop your own executive or signature presence
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
an authentic way, and that becomes just
Exactly.
who you are. Yeah. Great.
Exactly.
You mentioned alignment, so I just want to dig into that a little bit more if we could, when it comes to working with the teams. So what sort of elements are you talking about with alignment? Are you talking about alignment with values,
Typically, yeah.
and the role you're doing, or could you expand on that?
Yes. So when we start the conversation, alignment with values is often a starting point because people have some idea, some conception of what that means. I mean, if you've spent any time in the business world, you've seen some values written up on a wall somewhere. You've seen the poster. This is our vision. This is our mission. These are our values. And sometimes they're words on paper, and sometimes people are actually trying to live them, right?
Mm,
And if
mm,
you're in an organization where people are actually embodying those values and showing up in ways that you come and you go, oh, this culture, I understand what this culture is. I can tell you right now that this company values, connection, and they're here for the customer and the whatever. You can tell a lot of that when you see how teams interact, right? And you could say, well, you might say these are your values, but you are living in this space over here that is not
yeah.
what these values on the wall are. So a lot of times when we're talking about alignment, values is often where we start. And I often like to take the step back and say, but when was the last time that you considered what your personal values are?
Mm,
And I don't believe that every employee has to have the same values as their company, but they have to understand how their values fit into what the company expects of them in their role. And so when we're getting to this alignment piece, it is about, there's this piece of understanding what your own values are, which I think is interesting because a lot of people say, oh, no, I know what I value. I'm like, cool, tell me your top five. And they go,
mm.
oh, family,
Yeah.
they
Exactly.
kind of
Exactly.
deer the headlights look. I'm like, no, we're going to do the exercise. We're going to nail down what your values are. And they
Yes.
don't have to be the same. They don't have to be the same as everyone on your team. But
Yeah.
when you know your values and you can state your values and say, okay, you know what, I really value exploration. So I'm going to take my 2-week vacation every year because I'm going to travel the world because I know when I go out there, I get inspired and I come back with these great ideas. Then people know, oh, wait, this person, because this is one of their values, we're going to respect their time away. When they're out of office, they're out of office. And so the more people are aware of their own values, and, if you're in an organization that allows you to share these things and respects that, then people are able to do that work of saying, well, these are my values. I'm in this role and I can do this role for a while, but there's a value I have over here that's never being met. I have a value that has just been completely ignored because of this. And I
Yeah.
can do it for so long, but then I'm going to start disengaging, or I'm going to start
Yeah.
feeling, like I'm getting burned out because one of my core needs isn't being met.
Mm,
And so this is a place where as leaders, you can, you're able to set expectations. But if you're aware that somebody on your team has values that aren't being met, then you're like, okay, so what is your career path look like? Are there other opportunities here? Is it switching projects, switching teams, something like that? Or if there are being met, then that's when you're seeing people really show up as their full self. And one of the things I love about this idea of alignment, when you as a leader are able to understand, what those drivers are, what the internal motivation, what those values are for your team, that's
mm,
when you get, I mean, this discretionary effort. This is the piece I love to talk about, because we all have a certain degree of discretionary effort. I mean, you can go to your work, you can sit in that chair 40 hours a week, you can clock in, you can do the thing, you can meet your minimums, whatever, and you're doing fine. Like no one's going to complain. Great, you're doing a good job. That's fine. But when people give that discretionary effort, this is when you get creativity. This is when you get innovation. This is when you get productivity that you didn't expect, because somebody's so aligned with where their values are showing up in their work and what their company wants from them, or what their team wants from them, or the bigger vision of what the company is trying to achieve, the social impact they're trying to have, or the impact they're trying to have with their customers. They understand how their little piece of the puzzle makes that more possible. And so that's when you're going to have somebody say, oh, well, I was on vacation and I was in the shower and I had this aha thought, and I'm going to come back and, this thing that we've been struggling with for months, outside of work, I figured out how to put this together. But when people don't have that level of engagement, when they don't see that alignment for themselves, they might have that thought and go, no one's going to care. Yeah. They start coming to these beliefs of no one's going to listen to me anyway. It doesn't matter. I'm not on that project. No one wants to hear my voice. I don't need to say this. And the company then has this lost opportunity for, massive productivity, massive revenue, massive efficiency, whatever it is, because they were lacking that alignment.
Makes sense. I'm wondering, as I listen to that, so it's really tapping into the individual and then bringing that potential into the team context. And so I'm wondering how much psychological safety and, the degrees of trust also play a part here.
They cannot be overstated. Psychological safety has to be there. People have to know that if they're showing up authentically, that's going to be respected and valued, and not shamed or ridiculed or bullied in any way, those sorts of things. So yeah, if you're in an organization that isn't prioritizing psychological safety, whether it's stated or not, you're not going to get people showing up at their best.
It's quite a buzz term at the moment around the world. I'm wondering how many people really understand how to bring it to the forefront within a team, and that's probably another conversation.
Yeah, but, we can talk about that one for hours.
yeah. But to your point, it's something that we shouldn't be overlooking. So for leaders listening to this conversation, if you don't really fully understand what we're talking about with psychological safety, and at the moment, I'm delivering a executive development training in Europe, and this term is not commonly known with the groups that I'm speaking with. So, as much as I believed it was quite universal, it still seems to be more American centric than it is in Europe, at least with the groups that I'm working with. That's not to say it's everyone, but. So
that actually isn't terribly surprising to me, just from what I know of cross-cultural psychology and the way American cultures show up in different parts of the world. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's interesting. I thought because I developed this program I'm delivering, and I thought, gosh, I'm using a very universal idea and introducing it, and I had to really go back to the beginning and start to explain what it's all about before we could move forward and start to bring it to the team itself. So yeah,
it's funny because I believe that the feeling of psychological safety is probably universal, and yet the concept of prioritizing it and making it relevant in the workplace might not be.
Yeah well, that's certainly what I'm experiencing at the moment. One of the things that I always like to do is observe evolution, if you like, that's happening around us. And although I'm not a neuroscientist or a behavioral scientist, I like to watch what's happening in that space. And I'm very amazed at the moment by almost daily reports of new discoveries. And so when I then take that and I apply some of that development and look at the trends that have influenced my own career, whether it's in executive development or coaching, possibly one of the fastest niche areas in coaching is team coaching. And like listening to you speaking, I can start to get a good feel for why team development and focus on team is so important. But do you have thoughts yourself on why corporations seem to be starting to realize and shifting their focus a little bit to working with teams rather than just trying to develop the individual? Do you have any perspective yourself around that?
Um, my guess, I haven't really spoken with anybody specifically about this topic. I would guess it's more about kind of economies of scale,
Right.
because you can invest. I mean, I think executive development is really important because of the ripple effect it has. And
Mm.
yet, when you are having a team of people getting similar guidance and similar concepts and understanding, then the team is speaking of the same language.
Yeah.
And so the more that, instead of just having one person coming and going, oh, well, I know what my values are, or I understand my motivators, when you have a whole team of people that do that, there's that kind of economy of scale. Like, we have the same language, we can understand what we're all working through and supporting each other through this. I mean, because there's a lot of personal development in that as well. Anytime
Yeah.
a team's getting training, each individual person, I mean, they'll be going at their own speed. They have their own, their own histories, their own backgrounds, their own stories about, why the company's investing in them or why they're trying to learn whatever it is they're trying to learn.
Mm.
But the fact that they're doing it in a common space, I think would probably help move that needle a little faster than just one person coming along. I mean, I still love the ripple effect. I believe very much in the ripple effect,
Yeah.
and it's a bigger pebble in the pond if you're bringing more people along at once.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And to your point, I find in team coaching quite often we're also coaching the individuals. So
Yes.
you're working at both ends of the spectrum, but it is an entirely different dynamic that you're dealing
Yes.
with when you're working with a team, as I'm sure you know, and anyone that's a leader has
Mhm.
experienced that. Dealing with humans, life would be easy as
Yes.
a leader if we didn't have to deal with people,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For all of our Team ET leadership who are listening to the conversation, if they're listening to us and they're thinking, "Gosh, I wonder what I can do as a starting point to really help bring the team together, help them to develop and move towards becoming high performing." We'll use
Mhm.
inverted quote,
Yeah.
but um, do you have any guidance? Like, is there a 1, 2, 3 guideline, or do you have any guidance for how they could start that process?
I mean, like I said, I think for everybody who wants to influence their team, it's, influencing yourself first, making sure
Yeah.
that you're doing the work so that developing your emotional intelligence, showing up authentically, doing these kinds of things, creating that psychological safety for your team, I think is an important first step. But
Mm.
then I think it's also about communicating with your team. We're trying to make a change here. This is our approach. I think the more that you're
Right.
able to go in and not spring it on them, because I think a lot of leaders will come and go, hey, great, we hired somebody, we're going to do a training on this, or we're going to focus on this, and people go, oh, what did we do wrong?
Yeah.
Like there's automatically this level of defensiveness. But if you're able to go in and say, again, sharing the reasons, the understanding, the what you're hoping to achieve out of it,
Mm.
hopefully your team isn't too jaded, because sometimes people are like, oh, great, it's just one more
Here we go
training,
again.
we're never
Yeah.
going to do anything with it.
Yeah.
But when you come in as a leader really wanting to have that impact, that if you're there for the long haul, you're invested in your team, growing,
Yeah.
then they're going to feel that. They're going to feel that that's an authentic, hey, we're not just doing this for the bottom line. We're doing this because we want you to feel fulfilled and engaged in this role. It matters to the team. It matters to the company how you as an individual are showing up and doing.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a key step. I know it's
Yeah.
not a quick 1, 2, 3 though.
For sure. For sure. And I would even take that to a broader perspective and maybe even ask the team, what's going to help them
Yes.
um, perform at that level of expectation. What can we do collectively or individually for you, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think of that
no,
as kind of that needs assessment of what do you need to do to
yeah,
feel more engaged? What do you need to do to be able to achieve this role, what needs to be added to your plate as support systems, what needs to be taken off so that you can achieve, these priorities. I think that's absolutely a critical step.
Right. Yeah. It's a fascinating conversation. We could go down many tangent paths and talk about different things, but I think as a nice overview, we've covered some good ground. Are you working on anything at the moment? Like you writing a book or working on a new program? Are you doing anything that we
do
should
have
know
a
about?
book. I do have a book, but it's not related to leadership, actually. I'm also a breast cancer survivor, so I have a breast cancer book it's on its way out. But in the leadership space, um, yeah, I mean, I'm working with teams. I'm trying to help C-suite executives and their teams, unlock their full potential, and so that everyone becomes high performing. And like you said,
Yeah.
it's kind of in quotes because high performing can mean different things.
Yes.
But from my perspective, it comes down to achieving the things that you as an individual want to achieve, and hopefully that are in alignment with the company, so that, I mean, we all only get this one life, right? So let's live it to the
Absolutely.
fullest.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great advice. Where can people follow you or find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, they can follow me on LinkedIn. I also have a YouTube channel they can subscribe to, and they want to learn more, they can always just reach out and we'll chat.
Fantastic. Now you mentioned you are bringing out a book. Is it?
Yes.
Do you have a release date yet, or?
I don't have a release date yet. My publicist is kind of hounding me on the final epilogue I need to add to it. She asked me last week if I needed a kick in the pants, and I said
Yeah,
yes. So it'll be soon though.
this year.
This year, absolutely this
This
year.
year. Very good. Well, we'll keep a vigilant watch for the release, and maybe we have to come back together and talk again
Oh,
on the
thank you so
show.
much.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Dr. Parker, great conversation. Wonderful to connect with you, and of course, learning about motivation is something that I never tire of. And yeah, I'm confident our listeners have taken a lot away from this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.